the Wheel of Fortune, then indicating which emotion the artists would then have to follow. As in,
Wow.
fate dictates how artists are acting on stage.
All right.
And this one particularly, you'll see it once it starts.
Let's show it now, and then we can talk about it afterwards. Thanks, Brendan.
Cool.
All right, enjoy.
Hope.
These are the words
out beyond your recall. Go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame. Make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror. Just keep moving. No feeling is final. Don't ever let yourself lose me. Nearby is a country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand.
Okay, Brendan, we've just seen some snippets of your launch event in Amsterdam. Can you tell us exactly what is Dance for Beirut?
Of course. Dance for Beirut is an initiative that, well, we had the idea for early in September. So, of course, after the horrible explosion that happened, there was a lot of humanitarian aid, also in the Netherlands, for example, being raised. I helped a little bit with that, and then learnt that the aid actually does not go to the performing arts. Whilst usually these fundraiser activities are lots of performing artists are involved. They're the ones who bring lots of audience in, and I found it quite strange then that it wouldn't have a part that goes directly to performing artists in a crisis area. And so I checked with some friends in Beirut, because I've had the joy of performing there before. And indeed, there wasn't anything really being done, whilst most of them, after getting over the initial shock, went out onto the streets, went and helped the neighbor clear all the glass that was there. The decor builders who worked in theaters would go out and make tables for people. But there's no specific aid going that direction. So I thought, I'm going to check here in the Netherlands, and contacted a few friends and people I know in the art scene. And we went, why don't we, although it's difficult for everybody, of course, with the Corona crisis, at least we still have our buildings here. We have a government, let alone one that even does something, at least to provide us with the bare minimum to survive here, if you don't have any other income. And so, yeah, from that, we thought, what can we do? And at that point, then the Amsterdam Dance event said, hey, this is a nice initiative. We'd actually also like to support it somehow, but we're happening in a few weeks' time. So we gathered all forces and said, we're going to go for it. We're going to try and launch our campaign, if we must call it that, during the Amsterdam Dance event.
Okay. Yeah.
And because they, of course, couldn't do anything live either, they'd built this big Netflix-like structure where people could then surf the Amsterdam Dance events and also visit our event. What you just saw was called, well, Hope. We started off with a 30-minute talk show where we invited artists from Beirut and artists from here who'd been working there to talk more about the situation of the artists. And then we went into the dance, which was basically a 2-hour-long improvisation by 15 different people on stage, directed by fate. So we had one of these really tacky, kitschy wheels of fortune, and the fate would spin it. And then depending on which number it became, we would then see an emotion appear, and that emotion then dictated what the artists would be doing together on stage.
Okay, so that was the launch event here in Amsterdam, and How is this having an impact in Beirut or supporting performing arts in Beirut? Is it through raising donations or awareness, or
Uh,
how is it bridged?
yeah, we're doing both. So the straightforward one is, of course, we've set up here in the Netherlands a Woordenkunst campaign, basically asking people to donate to the performing arts there through the performing arts here. And we're also doing what we can to generate visibility. That's, as everybody knows, quite a challenge, especially in these days, competing with Netflix and the likes. And also what we want to do is to actually bring these artists in contact with each other. My dream is that artists around the world actually, will say, look, why don't we also pay attention to our peers, and raise funds for those who are in a crisis situation. And with Dance for Beirut, we're trying to set an example, if you will, and give people here, artists here, the possibility to do something for artists in Beirut. And the nice thing was, it already started. So the Yedita is a performing artist, electronic music and singer, who said, look, I'm going to write a song in one day, and what I managed to raise for that is going to Dance for Beirut. And that's what we're now doing, is trying to reach out to other artists and say, hey, would you also start doing small or big, if they want, charity events, so that in any case you talk to your audience, and that way you also bring your audience in contact, or again, bring the awareness to your audience about the situation there.
So why do you feel it's important to bring awareness or to support performing arts there in Beirut? What difference can that make after a crisis like this?
I have a very firm belief. I was trained, by the way, as a cellist and a conductor, and then went and did business school afterwards. But I've learned that the impact of arts in general, specifically performing arts, can be very big on the audiences. It's a responsibility to be the mirror of society, actually to create, as UNESCO calls it, intangible heritage. So to say, we with information and knowledge from the past, we create a picture of the here and now, which can have an influence on our audiences now, but also might be projected into the future. And well, there's one thing that people always say about the arts, it connects everybody. I actually really believe that. And especially when your society has been blown apart, whether that's through politics or whether it's literal, are unfortunately here the combination of both. Artists are the ones, it's the basis of urbanization too, isn't it? Put some artists there, something will start happening, it will attract other people, and then your city develops. Well, let's be proud of that as artists, but also promote it as artists, and at the same time as audiences or as partners or as governments even say, like, bravo, well done, yes, we're gonna give you the necessary attention, we're going to try and provide you with the funds, with the time, with the recognition and acknowledgement, and that way I think you can again at least start planting these seeds in this desert or in the ruins, and give plants and people a chance to grow again.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I certainly share your thoughts and feelings on art's ability to connect and create empathy and overcome situations like this, and heal. Let's bring this around to where we are today on this International Day for Tolerance. Do you see intolerance in this situation that is needing to be addressed? Or alternatively, do you see, as a byproduct of Dance for Beirut, either in the Netherlands or in Beirut itself, an increase of tolerance between people that are engaged in the project?
Unfortunately, there definitely is intolerance. Even some
Mhm.
of the speaker guests we had, for, for example, Janneke Rinsema, a Dutch comedian, stand-up comedian, went to Beirut for workshops for 2 months, and
Mm.
she was shocked by how difficult it was for people to just be able to out their opinion, even if it's in the form of satire or comedy. Let alone then other speakers we had who work in the club scene, the LGBTQ community. That's all. It's, you know, just being there is already a risk. Just going
Mm.
to a party is already a risk.
Right.
Speaking out is a risk. So is there intolerance? Yes, most definitely, and it's also supported by a lot of fear, which of course, as you know, is often used by the powers that be, by governments, by dictators. Another one of our speakers said, "Look, in our country, in Beirut, we have, you know, other countries have maybe one dictator. We here have 6,
Oh,
and
dear.
they've drained everything from our country. They've stolen everything from our country. We have nothing anymore to rebuild it again." So then is that there's also an intolerance towards the government. Completely
Mhm.
understandable, but of course, how can you make it work? And there, yeah, well, it's spoken as a diplomat. It starts with conversation, but it also starts with being able to accept everybody the way they are, and at
Mm.
least try and listen to each other.
Right.
And that then is quite a nice bridge, I find, to having such an improvisation event, where the only way of making art together, of making music together, is by listening and
Mm.
taking whatever happens for that, what happened, and seeing how you can add to it and how you can then make your world a bit more beautiful.
So do you have performers of different backgrounds, you know, and gender and sexuality all mixed together? Can you comment that? Or
That's, yes, definitely.
yeah.
Well, in the personally the projects that I've been setting up in the past, often in the
Mhm.
context of the classical music rave.
Mm.
For
Yeah.
example, we were asked to do the music for the, back then it was still allowed, the official fireworks of the city of Amsterdam, and
Mm.
there we took musicians from all parts of the world, put them together, and told each other, like, look, bring one song from your culture, and you have 1 day of rehearsals to teach it to the rest. So none of the music will sound the way you normally have it sound, because it's going to be with instruments and musicians from all over the world. But that worked. Especially, we noticed with the audience was very international too. We had tens of thousands of people in front of the stage, and you could immediately spot which one were from an Arab culture, which one from an Asian culture. It was beautiful when I sang a Belgian song to where I
Mm.
grew up, to spot a whole crew of Belgian people singing along with that song, and that, maybe even that event gave me the knowledge and trust for an event like this one, to just that we can put people together. That's the beauty of the language of art,
Mm.
because it's not literal.
Right.
Even in acting, even in spoken word, maybe
Mhm.
even in our conversation too, it's the way you look at each other, it's the way you move, and
Mhm.
and you can really, really play with that. And there, the idea of an emotion, and now we're open and friendly in our conversation. Imagine the fate spinning around and my window breaking out and it raining inside. I would
Mm.
probably change the emotion of this conversation. You would
Mhm.
probably pick up on it. And doing that live in a performance with people from all over the world, and actually seeing that they are, every single one of them is able and capable of dealing with these challenges, because it definitely is a challenge,
Mm.
it gives hope.
Okay,
And
good. And I guess the things you've put together with everybody, you know, from different backgrounds collaborating, as we said before, if that becomes the mirror,
mhm.
the audience can see that and have that reflection. Okay, well, it's okay for us to collaborate and talk and share ideas and concepts too.
Yeah.
Where do you see this developing? So, is this how long will this run for, and what's next after that phase?
we're using Dance for Beirut as our first campaign of a charity we're setting up called Soladoreti. So you can sing it. Go. I don't have perfect pitch. I don't know if I hit the right notes, but it's Soladoreti.
Okay.
And because from this entire experience, we learned that there isn't actually anything like a global solidarity fund for all of the performing arts. Performing arts themselves, in every city even, have their own kings of their own little kingdoms. Even in classical music, it's different periods are approached differently, and they're actually different groups of people. That's only one part of music. You can see that as a whole, but then we haven't added theatre, we haven't added dance, we haven't added puppetry or circus and all that. Yeah. And I think it's very important as a sector that we manage to also speak with one voice. Of course, different things are important for different people. But in the possibility of saying, look at our peers in other countries, in situations which might be much harder than ours, but look at them, what they are doing as performing arts, showing the value of performing arts, proving the value of performing arts. And so what we want to develop to in the next few years is to actually set up a global network of performing arts, which already exist, but not with the target of helping each other, of trying to link up and say, hey, my audience can be your audience, and let's make it happen.
Yeah, we share the same values at Art27 as well, art27.art. So let's just wrap up with where we're at and how people can find you, Brendan. So we've got, let me get this right, danceforbeirut.org.
Indeed, yes.
Okay, and then we also have a crowdfunding campaign, which is voordekunst.nl.
Indeed, yeah, that's a Dutch crowdfunding platform specifically for the arts.
Right, and you can search for Dance for Beirut there, or if you're really attentive, you can do voordekunst.nl projecten /11307 Dance for Beirut. But I think we're going to put the link on screen in a moment.
That'd be wonderful.
Make life much easier. You've pulled a lot of partners together for this, right? Amsterdam Dance Event you mentioned, Amsterdam's Fonds voor de Kunst, Cello Biennale.
Yeah,
Classical
the
Music Rave,
Festival, yeah.
Classic Music, Muziekgebouw, NPO.
The National Music Instrument Fund, the Muziekgebouw, indeed. In total, we had about 14, 15 partners. Very special to us was that the Gromhouthal was made available to us, and that because one important thing to mention too, the artists here are also compensated for the work they do. Very often they're the last ones to be paid in situations of this, and that's
in most situations.
In most situations, true, yeah. And I think that's quite wrong. But what was beautiful is then that everybody who was involved with it said how they agreed to the equal rights, equal pay. Everybody got the same.
Oh, very good.
And I'm actually proud of everybody who was involved. And some of them then also said, you know what, I can afford it. We're donating what we were earning here.
Well, yeah, congratulations on putting this together, and let's hope that it makes an impact. I think, showing the difference between attitudes here and attitudes maybe in Beirut, and creating that contrast and mirroring both cultures will be beneficial in both directions. And then you've got the stage and the listeners and the audience and everything growing online. So wish you great success. May it continue and grow out globally. And in all of your other projects, Brendan, I wish you well in these difficult times in 2020. It looks like you are living through this age of intolerance with a smile, and that's what we encourage.
Can't help it. Thank you very much. And of course, as we're starting, we're very young. If people do want to follow us or share a like, etc., very much appreciated.
There you go. You know what to do, guys. Thank you for listening so far. We have another speaker in just 5 minutes, John Speyer from Music in Detention. So please join us again in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you, Ray.
Welcome back. I'm Ray Gibson from Art27. Art27 is a platform for artists, arts educators and arts organisations working in Europe and beyond We're sharing stories, cultural programs, and raising awareness of the power of the arts as a force for social change and social inclusion. And today is November 16th, 2020, International Day for Tolerance, and some fantastic projects and speakers. Today, we've just been hearing from Dance for Beirut, and now we're joined by John Speyer from Music in Detention. We'll hear from John in just a second. A little reminder that we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, so if there are questions, you can write them in the Facebook chat. We'll pick them up and do our best to answer. Welcome, John. How are you?
I'm okay. It's nice to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
And where are you today, John?
I'm at home, where I've been most of the last 6 months, in London, South London.
In London. Okay, very good, very good. So please, can you give us a bit of an introduction to Music in Detention, how this started, which I think was in 2008, is that right?
A bit earlier than that, actually.
Even earlier, okay.
I'll tell the story a little bit.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we've been around for about 15 years. The original pilot project was in 2005.
Mhm.
We were set up by a group of people in somebody's memory. It was the wife of one of our founders had died, and with money that was left in her estate, it was agreed by the family that they wanted to do things that this lady Helen Tetlow would have believed in and wanted to see, and work with refugees and music were two passions of hers, and so that's in a sense where the idea came from. That was the genesis. But there were at least a couple of the people involved in setting MID up had got connections, family connections in their family histories to Nazi concentration camps and Chilean prison camps in the Pinochet regime.
Right.
And there are sort of powerful stories from both of those times about the power of music for people in places of confinement and in desperate situations. So that kind of family history sort of fed into what became later on Music in Detention. So what we do is we take music making, participatory music making, into immigration detention centres in the UK, and we run music projects with people who are detained in those centres.
Right.
We also use music as a way of connecting those people in detention to people who are outside detention, living in the community nearby, usually, sometimes further away. But we particularly work to create connections with groups in society who are also on the edge, who are also marginalised, stigmatised, people who understand that life is a struggle, and they understand what it's like for everyone else to look down on you.
Right.
And we find that music's a really powerful way of creating connections and empathy and understanding between those groups. And I stress between, because I mean in both directions.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, we're there to improve well-being and empathy and understanding, and those are essentially our sort of the outcomes we seek to have an impact on. So let's see. There are currently 7 immigration removal centres in the UK. We're, I believe, the only country in Europe to have no time limit on detention, and that's certainly one of the things that makes detention a very troubling, very traumatizing experience.
And just sorry to interrupt, John.
Sure.
This is new terminology to me, because I'm not as well informed, frankly. So I hear, probably like many others in the news, terms like camps and all these things. But this is, one of the first times I've been hearing this word detention. Because as I grew up in the UK, a detention centre was like a naughty boys' home, and it was like basically a prison. And that
Well, yeah.
phrase is being used here too then.
Mm. Well, immigration detention is a relatively new thing. Obviously, prisons have been
Mm.
around for a very long time, and in many ways, the prison system is a much more, has huge problems of its own. But it is, in some respects, in many respects, a more mature system. The immigration detention system. I mean, until the 1990s, there were just these centres where a few hundred people might be. But in the 90s and especially the 2000s, it grew to a system that had, let's see, there were about 11 detention centres. It's now down to 7, plus short-term holding facilities of various kinds. There's lots of technical detail here, which I'll try not to sort of bore you with, and I'm not an expert on it anyway. But at its peak, the system was able to detain 4,000 people at a time.
Right. And are these people coming into the country and waiting to be housed and start a life in the UK, or are they people who are being detained, ready to send back to somewhere else, or is it a mixture?
Yeah, well, it's a whole mixture, But we're talking about, let's see, I think the average number of people detained in a year from sort of 2009 to 2018, if I remember correctly, is about 28,000. So this is a big system. That's something worth noting. There are a lot few. This year, things have changed a lot in all sorts of, in a number of really important ways because of the pandemic and other things as well. And we can talk about that later. But it's a prison-like system.
Yeah.
With important similarities to prison and important differences to prison. But essentially, these are prison-like establishments, locked doors, barbed wire,
right. Okay.
secure environments.
Yeah.
And the people in them are all defined by the government as foreign nationals. I'm choosing my words carefully. So some of them are people who recently arrived in the country, and as in the back of a lorry, or now in a small boat, or whatever. Many of those people will be claiming asylum, but not all of them. There will be people who've been in the country for a number of years with an asylum claim that's still not resolved, because those take years often.
Yeah.
There will be people who have done time in prisons in the UK, and then government policy is essentially that most of those people should be then deported at the end after their sentences have finished. So having done the sentence, they then continue to be held under immigration rules pending deportation. A lot of those people are the ones who spend the longest time in detention because the cases are very complicated.
Yeah.
But those people, this is important to know, those people include a lot of people who have grown up in the UK. So we are not just talking about recent arrivals. We're talking about people who came here with their families as young children. They've grown up here. English is their, effectively their first language. They have families here. They've been to school and college, and they've worked, and they've had kids of their own. Lots of connections. Maybe they never went to the country their family were from. Maybe they went, but only on a holiday. That kind of thing. And then they get into trouble. Something happens. They get into a spot of bother, shall we say? All sorts of different crimes. Obviously some serious, some not. And then they're classified as a foreign national offender.
Right.
And then in addition, we've seen the Windrush scandal, which I don't know if everybody on this session knows about it, but this is people who came from the Caribbean to Britain, their families, and with their families in the 40s and 50s, at the invitation of the British government, and are legally resident in the UK and have spent their lives here and contributed, and so on and so forth. And then, due to various things that happened in the immigration system and the government, they started to get caught up in government policy of a hostile environment towards migrants. And people started to be asked to prove their right to reside here, and in some cases were detained, and in some cases were deported. It's been a huge political scandal.
You've got a whole mix of people with different backgrounds and different tensions. And thanks for explaining that, because it's not always clear. Certainly
No,
not to me. And
it's
it's a
little
sort of our
known
view of
by,
it, yeah.
it's little known, and that across society really, there aren't that, people just haven't heard of it, or if they've heard of
Right.
it, they don't really know what it is. It's quite a secretive system. So one of our aims, I suppose, is to bring it more into the public eye.
Yeah, got it. And there's a painting you wanted to share with us, I think. Is that? Could you tell us what this is?
Well, so this is from that 2008. We were working at that time at a detention centre in an old naval barracks on the south coast in a town called Gosport near Portsmouth. And there was a guy in there from Poland, Zbigniew was his name. And he really got into, he did some music stuff with us, and he really got into art, and he did a lot of art. He did a lot of stuff in the art room at this centre. And he produced this painting, whose title was Music in Detention.
Oh.
And I use this sometimes just as I just think it's such an eloquent portrayal of our work, and essentially it's part documentary and part fantasy. But the fantasy part is, to me, communicates what the sessions meant to him. So there are people in the foreground of the painting there are actual people. There's a member of staff, detention. There's a detention officer there in his white short sleeve shirt.
Yeah.
Of our
just
artists
behind the saxophone.
Yeah, there's a guy playing the saxophone. He's one of our artists, or was at the time. And then there are some guys in the foreground doing their thing, and those are guys who were in the centre. They are people detained. But then the further away you get from that foreground, the more kind of other things you see. There's a few celebrity participants. Yeah, people might notice Freddie Mercury.
Indeed, yeah.
And is John Lennon in there? I think John Lennon's in there, and B.B. King. So that's great. We love that. And so then the bit I love the most is the dancing in the background, the walls sort of breaking down, disappearing,
melting away.
And then there's this enigmatic angel holding the canvas, as it were, up, or putting it out, or as somebody once pointed out to me, they might be taking it in. And to me, I don't know, people will have different. It's always lovely to talk about this with people, because every time I do it, somebody spots something or sees something in the picture that I've not seen or heard. But
it's a striking image. I love it. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
So I have a sense of the sort of inner freedom that can come, I think, and which in so much we do lots of evaluation. We talk to people and ask them what the music making meant to them, what did you like, what didn't you like, what difference did it make? That's our
we
evaluation
can see inside someone's head
in a nutshell. And they tell us amazing things about their lives. It's another opportunity for voice, as is music making and lyric writing and so on and so forth. And this sense of how you feel inside yourself is what comes out so often, and that's what, to me, this picture expresses. So it's a great sort of example of what the work inside the centres can do.
Right.
And then we have the video. Should we go to the video? Because the video is the other side of the work in the community.
Yeah, let's show that now. That would be great.
Yeah, so if I can just introduce it briefly. So we did a project with a group of young people at a youth centre in West London, which was about a mile or two from Heathrow Airport, where there are 2 detention centres, and we were working at one of those centres. So we had a project where we ran sessions with the detainees, and we ran sessions with the group in the community, and the artists went back and forth between the 2 groups. So the artists this is where peace building comes in. The artists go back and forth. So each time they're with the young people, they're going, well, let's play you the stuff we recorded at the centre the last time we were there, which was yesterday or last week or whatever. And the same back at the centre. So the 2 groups, they don't meet physically. I mean, if it's young people, there's no way they would be allowed into a detention centre anyway if they're not adults.
Okay.
But they have this rather special thing where they're in their own group, they're in their own room, if you like, but they're hearing all this amazing stuff from a group that they've never met before.
Somewhere else, yeah.
And so it's a social encounter, it's social bonding, but it's through the creative experience, and creatively, it's a collaboration. So you create stuff, you send it to the other group, they do something to it, they add to it, they put another track down,
keep
or
building,
they, or add a verse, or create something of their own in response. And so they're building up this body of work, and your own stuff comes back to you, and it's still it's like change, but it's still yours. It's a sort of joint ownership.
Let's
material.
roll the video, because I'm just conscious of time. So
Okay,
thanks
sure.
for making the introduction. Let's show that now, if we may.
Sure,
And
sure.
our wonderful tech team will
Thank you.
stream it as well.
Used to going on. Man said, keep on fighting, keep on fighting, keep on fighting, keep on fighting. When the world keeps on trying to keep us down, just keep on grinding, keep on grinding.
Project has bring a lot of difference and in the life of these young people. Some of them were really lacking of motivation and things to do, and thanks to this project they are kind of now more inspired and they're ready to kind of take on board different opportunities. This is with the older group, like it's more mentoring, so now they feel like they have that skill as well and confidence. I feel in general with the little kids it have bring them more confidence to speak up wherever they feel instead of just playing all the time. They're starting to be a bit more mature.
All I seem to see is hardships and struggles, people taking drugs and committing crimes. Different roads, same old troubles, that's why I choose to rhyme. The best part of the project was writing the lyrics and like me and everyone else went and listening to that like tracks back.
I gotta take the pain and put it up in the rain. I want to see it up in my face because I thought it down too fast and I didn't like it. Everything went so dark, my life went past. We go back to the days when the days were going grey.
Highlights of the project for me would be just kind of group cohesion. Started off with very different people, different age groups, but along the way we've kind of worked with different sets of people and made things that they want to listen to, which makes them even more involved. And you can see the confidence that people have gotten from week 1 to week 3.
I couldn't believe it, but they're looking at their mother's ring, but then I had to go away, and they're trying to fly away. They're trying to get away for the day. They're trying to change their lives, but they're seeing it in their eyes every time they see it.
I think it was meaningful, so like it's how they're feeling, in like being in there and like feeling trapped. So I don't know, like not seeing family and stuff like that. It's a bit hard for them, to be honest.
Together as a group found that there's people that are in a situation that are kind of trying to reach out and voice through their music, and for them to be able to have people on the outside who are hearing their music or trying to say something back, it's like a really good thing, like to have. You know, they don't really have people to speak to, so for us to be able to communicate even through music, such a little small subtle thing, goes a long way.
It's helping young people like express their feelings, and it's a lot better than just like swearing and like cussing people out and stuff.
There's a lot more potential in young people than I first perceived there to be.
Inspiring, that's the word, because that's what has brought to the life of the young people I work with, inspiration.
Getting young people here to recognise what an immigration movement center is and empathise with what people are going through there, and kind of, you know, writing lyrics based upon that, because the response from the detainees has been really positive to that. They really appreciated what's come from here, and in return they've recorded some amazing things.
Keep on fighting, oh, keep on fighting. When the world down, just keep inspiring. Yeah. Keep on fighting. Oh, keep on fighting. When the world keeps on trying to keep us down, just keep inspiring.
Okay, John, thanks for sharing that. So I'm happy that you're going to join our panel discussion in about 10 or 15 minutes as well, but I think it's worth wrapping up this section for your project for Music in Detention to just talk about intolerance and tolerance specifically. Can you tell us what intolerance you've seen over these 12, 15 years working on this? And it's very unfair to ask you to do this in a couple of minutes, but if we could touch on this, it would be great.
Yeah, what intolerance I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think the short answer is probably less than you might think.
Okay, yeah.
And I think I've got an idea of what the reason might be. I mean, the most outstanding example of intolerance was actually from a conversation I had with one of the detention centre managers, and this is not at all representative of detention centre managers. It was very much this individual, not the group as a whole. Mm-hmm. But he said to me once that it was curious to me why he felt it necessary to say to me that he felt that immigration detention was necessary because the country was being because there were so many migrants coming to the country, and he quoted some enormous figure that was, one of these sort of myths that was floating around at the time, as many people as live in Birmingham, or one of those kinds of myths. Right. So that does sort of jump out in my memory since you asked the question. But the thing that jumps out from the work we do in the community is that people have a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of anxiety. When I say ignorance, I mean people just don't know what is going on in other people's lives. And so we've certainly had, in groups that we've worked with in the community, we've certainly had people expressing attitudes that wouldn't fit with our values. But we sort of encourage that, because if people can't speak, how do you work with them? I mean, you have to get it out in the open. It's about how you do that. It's all, So we are there to create a space where people feel comfortable, safe, able to express themselves, and where they feel valued by us. If we don't achieve that, then we can't make any impact on people's attitudes. You just put people's backs up, you're not going to get anywhere, basically. So you hear quite a lot that seems to me to come from the way that immigration is so often discussed, which is it's a sort of theoretical issue, or not theoretical exactly, but abstract. It's this big political thing about migration or immigration and asylum, and it gets batted around, and there are it's sort of shared messaging, social media, down the pub, politicians, and this stuff sort of circulates around. And the impact we're trying to have on it, I suppose, is to insert some real first-hand experience,
to overcome the them and us kind of thinking, and be more inclusive. And you're creating that safe space to be tolerant and to listen and understand.
So exactly. And what we find is that among the people that we work with, there is this immense capacity for solidarity and empathy, but it needs an experience that can put something new into somebody's thinking.
Good. Yeah. Create that spark and let it run.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so paradoxically, it's the safe space where things that we might not want to hear individually can be expressed. It's through that safety that you can actually do something that might reduce those attitudes.
Right. Yeah. So there's some notes that I've saved just ahead of today's talk. This is a kind of positive tolerance, characterized as positive evaluation, appreciation, and support of differences and diversity, This is a quote from Mummonday and Wenzel from 1999, which was shared by the UN. So yeah, as opposed to negative tolerance, which is just kind of putting up with people. This is actually understanding and educating. Yeah.
I suppose I'm not wildly keen on the word tolerance, but it's because I kind of, it speaks more to, I don't know, the way I read the word. It's more the negative than the positive.
Right.
You know,
that's
like
true, isn't it? If you tolerate something, it is also a kind of a synonym for putting up with something, isn't it? That's true. Yeah.
And it has a sort of I think it has a history in Western Europe that's about the toleration of minorities, like allowing them beneficently to sort of be present in society, as it were. So there's a kind of political baggage for me with the word. But, you know, toleration, I don't know, of Catholics or Jews or Muslims, you know.
Well, let's do the word toleration a favour together, and let's say that proactive toleration is a great thing. And we can create safe spaces and
tolerance much more. Thank you.
There you go. All right. A positive finish. So let's pause there, John, and we'll welcome you back for our panel discussion in about 8 minutes.
Thank you very much.
We'll also be joined by 2 other guests, and we'll go deeper into these themes of tolerance today.
I look forward to it.
All right. Hello and welcome back. I'm Ray Gibson from Art27. Art27 is a platform for artists, arts educators and arts organisations working in Europe and beyond. We're sharing stories, cultural programmes and raising awareness of the power of the arts as a force for social change and social inclusion. This is our panel discussion kicking off in a moment on today, November 16th, 2020, International Day for Tolerance. And we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you have questions, you can put them in the Facebook chat and we will pick them up and do our best to answer. And I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves now. We have John Speyer, Hannes Siebert, who's on the road, and Inge, forgive me, Inge, you might have to help me pronounce your family name. Inge Koistermans?
Perfect.
Oh, wow. Okay, lucky. So, so if I may ask, starting with John, can you give us a few minutes introduction of, you know, where you come from, what you're working on, help our audience get to know you, please?
Hi, I'm John Speyer, and I'm director at Music in Detention, which is a small UK charity. We do music making with people detained in immigration detention centres in the UK, and we work to improve their well-being and to build empathy and understanding between them and people outside detention in the wider community. So that would be the peace building part, if you like, particularly of the work. In my spare time, I'm also involved with a project in South Yorkshire, which uses a special form of dialogue to engage with people who are living in local communities where there is lots of worry about migration and lots of community tension. So there's another bit of peace building in my I support that in a voluntary capacity. So I thought I'd mention that because it might come into the conversation, I suspect.
All right, thank you, John. And you have an interesting heritage, if I understand this well, from Polish, Dutch, Spanish.
Yeah, my granddad,
Moroccan.
my granddad, my paternal granddad was Dutch.
All
so right. I'm kind of a little bit Dutch. The name Speyer was a common Jewish name, I think, in Amsterdam before the war. So yeah, but I'm a Jew whose family came from all over the place, really. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome. And Hannes Siebert, you're perhaps in the car on the way. You're a man of action today. You run peace negotiations, as I understand, and I think we've caught you between negotiations. Is that right?
I'm arrived. I just came from one town on the border to another one. Yeah, my day job is peace negotiations, ceasefire negotiations, and help with design and setup of dialogues at the beginning and the end of a war and the beginning of a peace process, and then obviously a bit of looking also at the architecture of peace processes. But my background until early 2000 was in media. I was first a newspaper editor and then a filmmaker, and that's how I got into peace processes in my own country in South Africa.
From reporting.
And so the first phase was really they pulled us in to see if we can help design the media and communications programs in the South African peace process. And since then, I've done it in a few other countries in Asia and in the Middle East, assist particularly with the design of peace architecture and also focusing on the media. I have a few slides you can look at quickly.
That would be good now,
as an introduction. The second slide there, you see a bunch of hands. It was an advert. I don't know if we're looking at it or.
It's coming through now, yeah.
We go to the second slide. Yeah, so that was advert from the South African peace process of how do we move from fighting towards the peace process. The third slide, you'll see the elements that we look at. The next slide, which look at really across the media, how do we use from baby powder boxes to soap boxes to television programs, radio programs, newspaper supplements, get the newspapers to work together. Because part of, in every conflict that you see, where there's a civil war or like the South African anti-apartheid fight, the media becomes part of the problem. And how do we break those stereotypes? And I think media and art is one of the most powerful ways to break those stereotypes. And that was part of the research and programming that we did, that we felt also we're not going to look at ghettoize peace art, but actually produce mainstream media and art and television that compete and fill the space in peak hour times and proper television and print and other times. So the South African one is a bit old. It gives away my age. Right? So it's an old program. If I can go to the next slide, the fourth slide shows a little bit of the television programs we've done, youth programs, talk shows, radio shows, exchanges. The next one, if you go, the next slide is a little bit, I've moved in the late 2000s away from media and became more actively involved as a facilitator and helping with ceasefire negotiations and the design and build of dialogues and peace processes. But I felt quite compelled that the narrative, what disturbed me is the narrative of the children in each one, who suffers the most and who are really the true reflections of the divide. And it was particularly interesting to watch and follow the children's art and help to create spaces for children's art, children's interactive theater, wall art, any form of art, music, and so forth. And so in Sri Lanka and Cyprus and Syria and Burma and Lebanon, we focused a lot on in my evenings and weekends to really support the artists from each of those countries to help. I mean, the intolerance of the war play off inside the refugee communities with children, or it's leftovers in schools, and the trauma is there. So if we just scroll through the rest, I wouldn't have to talk about it. You will see the next slide. You will see some wall art here in Asia, and Asia and Syria there. And the next slide, you see sorry, it's a drawing of two soldiers, but they shoot, and where they connect becomes a flower. It's a kid. It's a drawing from a child in Nepal. That is in one of the orphanages there. The next one is Syria Interactive Theater in the refugee camps, where Syrian actors and directors and musicians are working. The art is from Cyprus. And it's been really extraordinary to see how the Syrian actors and musicians has played a significant role in these, and very, a little bit support have helped them a great deal forward. And the last slide, briefly, is just it's a slide of the different religions and some of the truths in there. But this slide had quite interesting impact in places like Sri Lanka, here in Myanmar, and elsewhere, where you take the essence of the messages and that go into forms of art from the different communities. I just put the messages up there. I didn't have enough time to find for you all the art and the newspaper supplements that came
really
out of there. But it was really powerful to just take the common language of the different religions and just go up. Because we sit in the middle of each of these conflicts. And I think the quote for me always of Michel Versace, he was the son of a Jewish rabbi in Israel. And he always said, where do we stand as peacemakers or artists in a conflict? And he said, as an artist and a journalist, I stand in the middle. I'm not standing in no man's land of neutrality. I stand in the middle where the conflict is most intense and where I can reach out and touch both sides. And I stand there on compassion and love and justice and truth. And I found that always a really extraordinary quote from him, being a son of a rabbi and in Israel and Palestine. So thank you. That's my introduction.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing those slides as well and putting those together. That's great. We'll come back to some of those themes, particularly on the media side. Inge, thanks for being very patient. Could you tell us about yourself and what you're working on, please?
Yes, I'm Inge Köstermans. I'm running the Festival Academy. We offer peer learning to festival managers worldwide. Basically from the belief or the way that we see festivals is that they are not islands, but they are connected to what is going on in the world. So the idea is basically that from sharing perspectives and listening to each other's stories, from people who come from very different perspectives and backgrounds, we can raise awareness, compete ignorance, and act from festivals. So it's really a reflection on the role of festivals in today's society. And I think as the UN Secretary Antonio Guterres said, like, people are not born to hate, which refers to Nelson Mandela's quote. So intolerance is learned, and thus it can be prevented and unlearned. So it's basically from that principle that from listening and really hearing about each other's circumstances, we can care more and be more informed and aware.
Right. Okay, thank you.
By the way, a community of 700 festival managers from more than 90 countries and all continents.
Wow. So they are a great sample set, let's say, of what's going on. Okay. And let's stay with you, Inge, if we may. So one of the first questions we'd like to bring up in this panel discussion is, where do you see intolerance in your work and also in your social life?
I think with the work of the Festival Academy, we are confronted with a lot of levels of intolerance. In 2015, we had to cancel our physical atelier that was supposed to take place in Kampala because of the gay law that was voted there at that point. We have a lot of people who come from regions where freedom of expression is repressed. We had at the Valletta Atelier in 2017 a keynote speaker, Shahidul Alam, who is a Bangladesh photographer and actually the initiator of the first photography festival in Bangladesh, who was locked up for weeks on end without a trial because he reported on the student protests in Bangladesh at that point. And he was actually freed thanks to the social media and the international network that he had managed to create. So at a certain point, I had to release him. So on all these levels, or also on the level of visa, we are working globally. So people have to travel from different countries to places. We had many issues where people were not allowed to travel, and not because of real reasons, but on the basis of where they came from, mainly targeting also Arab regions, things like that, when we had an atelier in Hungary. So yeah, I think on many levels this is reflected in the work that we are doing.
So a lot of restricted movement, restricted expression, and the inability to report. Okay. And then can we move to you, please, John? Where do you see intolerance in your work, and also in your own life as you move around and be a citizen of the world?
Yeah, you asked me this question in the earlier session. I'm going to give a different answer this time.
Great, yeah.
In my work, I don't feel that I see huge levels or sort of virulent levels of intolerance. And I think I can think of two reasons for that. I mean, you know, I hear a lot of misconceptions. I hear comments that categorize people, that racialize them, but overt expressions of hatred, not really. And I attribute this to two things. Firstly, I think the detention system, which is hugely problematic, which really messes up people's lives in a huge way, shows to us its better side, because we're the guys who go in and make music, and you know, we work with people who work in the system, whose job it is to organize activities and this kind of thing. So we, you know, detention centers are complex places where bad things definitely happen, but good things can happen too. And because we're on the good side, so we don't tend not to see so much of the bad side. And then the other reason, I think, is that detention is a system. So it you know, the violence that it perpetrates, the suffering that it inflicts, it's not so much what it's not so much one individual, or you know, it's not what individuals do or individuals think even. It's the way the whole system works. And within that system, people try to find a way to feel that they're doing the right thing, I think, in most cases.
Right, so people navigate their way through it. So
it's highly complex, I think. Out in the community and in my own sort of general life, I mean, yeah, sometimes I'm surprised. This is not about what happens at work, but sort of just life in general. Sometimes I'm surprised by what I hear, that, gosh, I wouldn't have thought this person that I know is feeling that way about this issue. But there's so much, we live in such tense and kind of conflicted times that in a broad sense, it's not surprising, but in a sort of like, gosh, is that what he thinks? You know, that kind of thing. So a sort of sudden expression of distrust of Muslims, or
well, yeah,
I find personally quite shocking, but I shouldn't be surprised that this, you know, reaches even into my cozy Guardian reading bubble, you know.
Well, and I think sometimes it surprises us or catches us out because we're not always aware what the information stream is to people that we know and like. You know, we're all using different filters, and if people are receiving different data and different facts and different spins on the information, then the outcomes can be very different. So people that we grew up with and that we believe we share common values with, we can be quite shocked at their opinions depending on what they've seen and heard quite recently.
I think that's right, but I think it's also to do with people's own sort of lives and backgrounds and needs and so on. You know, changing. You know, we're kind of committed to the idea that we're trying to play our part in changing attitudes. Yeah. But you know, you don't change attitudes by picking off an issue and doing a bit of myth busting, because people's attitudes are an attitude on one issue is part of your whole way of looking at the world, your belief system, the person that you are, your identity, which is why art, I think, can be helpful, because it can get to the heart of those things.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, and let's move on to Hannes. Are you still with us? Are you okay? You're comfortable, Hannes?
Yeah, I'm here.
So in your slides, you were mentioning arts and the media together, and I thought that was really really interesting. One of our next questions here is, what role is the media playing in magnifying intolerance? Well, first of all, do you agree with that summary that maybe media is magnifying intolerance, and how is that being done?
You know, particularly in divided societies, the media is really the voices of the different sides of a conflict, and even those that try to cross a bridge still frame that conflict in a particular way. It takes a bit of time to create inclusive frameworks where we are fairly represented in a shared media space. But coming out of civil wars in most of the countries I work, the media is incredibly divided and reinforce the misperceptions of each other, the inability to hear each other, the stereotypes about each other, not acknowledging the foundations of who the others are and where they come from, and you know, and it sometimes, just like if you look in Cyprus, a simple acknowledgement of the other's history and the other that they exist and they have legitimate infrastructure. But in a war situation, you know, you from not acknowledging even that I have a grievance or that I have any legitimacy on one side or to the other side, and it takes really a long time to. In South Africa, we work particularly, and in Sri Lanka and Nepal and Lebanon, with newspaper editors and journalists to see how do we reframe conflicts, use more inclusive frameworks. How do we, you know, sets of questions? You know, we've tried to see, particularly the kind of questions that you use as a facilitator and a mediator, are excellent questions for investigative journalists as well, in terms of broken relationships, broken systems, lack of communication, the kind of values they share, their history, their culture, their identities. And each one really probing questions that, rather than judging and just keep putting people in different frames, how do we break that frames? And that, you know, I find some of the most wonderful frame breakers children, you know, and particularly in, you know, I've seen in particularly in the Syria refugee camps, where the Rohingya refugee camps, but my experience with the Syrian refugee camps, where the pain is so raw. We once came across a little girl. Her father and her mother was killed in front of her. She was 4 years old, and she lost speech. She couldn't speak, and it was drawing that pulled her out. I'm sorry, I'm jumping between formal media and a child, but for me, you know, the narrative of the children has become so important in every war, because we sit day in and day out at these negotiations tables, and I really force myself for the last 15 years that I will not remain at the table. I will go to an orphanage and to a refugee camp over weekends to make sure I hear the real narrative.
Right, unfiltered, and yeah,
the narrative that should reframe the narratives that we just hear the political negotiators repeat.
Which, thank you, and it leads us to another question for all of us, really. So we see media taking sides in a conflict. We also see, in supposed peacetime, mass media creating opinions, creating influence as well. Then we've also heard from Hannes there about, you know, Charles' drawings being often the raw truth, which leads us to the question, you know, as artists, how can we overcome media's tilt on intolerance sometimes, or how can we influence the overall perspective, and for anyone? So Inga or John or Hannes?
Can I chip in here? I think this thing about framing, which is a word we use a lot nowadays, but it's such an important concept, I think. I'm remembering I've been a little bit involved in work around Israel and Palestine as a Jew that supports Palestinians, and one of the things that I think we see so often there is how how an act of violence will reinforce the divide, will reinforce that hostile framing that and deepen the sort of the inability of people in that situation to kind of to see beyond their own tribe and their own perspective and so on. And and I'm contrasting that with something I remember happening at some point during the South African peace process, when there was a terrorist act at some point in the sort of process towards elections, and the political response was that it wasn't going to derail the process. So if it was an attempt, as I guess it was, to sort of derail it by creating hostility, it failed, and that's because the framing had changed, I guess. So it seems to me that I love that, Hannes. I loved your quote. I'd like to hear more about that from the guy who said that we're in the middle where the conflict is at its most intense, but we can talk to both sides, rather than in the middle in the sense of neutral. It's not about neutrality. We have our values that we bring to it, but we can find a method that allows people to be heard within that set of values. And it's kind of contradictory. You're sort of holding a space where things that are contrary to your values can be heard, but it is part of those values that they are heard, if you see what I mean.
So may I extend your question, John? So I think, can we bring this back to the role of artists? So how can we put ourselves in the middle, and how can we influence the situations around us? Inga, maybe you have some thoughts on this from the things you're seeing as well.
If I may, I think just a very concrete example. There's a Henk Willis Thomas, who is a conceptual Black US-based artist, who set up a network which is called The Wide Awake. And it's like 17 cultural organizations that united and crowdfunded quite an amount of money to influence elections. And they've been doing demonstrations, they've been using billboards, they've been using social media to get their message out and to get people to go and vote and to hear that this is important. So I think the same tools that are being used by the media can also be used in a way by artists, and in a networked approach where they act together to get a sort of messaging outside. So yeah, there are multiple examples of these where artists set up these kind of frameworks to counteract these narratives. One of the things that we did with the Festival Academy is, for example, post-blast Lebanon to organize, we call it a hotspot, which is kind of, I don't know if it's a good name concerning that situation, but the idea of it was to host a conversation where we invited people from the ground, like Hannes was saying, like to go to the camps, to hear from the people, and to really engage a conversation with an international community, to hear from the people who are actually living in Lebanon at that point, what is going on. Because there is a story that is projected through the media, but it's not all of it. And there is really the real life situation, and there's a lot of information that is valuable, and you do that through a sort of connection because we've been there, we did an atelier there, we have friends there, so there is a kind of caring relationship towards these people who go through this crisis, and to build international solidarity through these connections that we constructed in one way or another.
Yeah. And do you think that there's an opportunity? Sorry, Hannes, go on. Sorry.
What was really striking to me, you remember the different people's uprisings last year, where people experience really great suffering, where both in the Lebanon one and in the Chile, you remember the Chile one where everybody played violin and singing, and the Lebanon, the artists came out and singing, and everybody sang. And it was really extraordinary there. And you remember the Standing Rock protests of the pipeline in America, where prominent American artists like Dave Matthews and a whole string of them performed and stood between the protesters and the police. And they eventually, on and off, helped won the people their court case. And it was just, this is really musicians standing in the middle and in an extraordinary, courageous way.
Yeah, that's a great reference. Okay, let me get your reaction to a quote that we came across now as well. This was on gulfnews.com. It was in an article, Islamophobia, Why Macron is Wrong on the Freedom of Expression Debate. Maybe we can pull this quote up on the stream here. For anyone listening and not watching the screen, maybe they're listening to a podcast or something later on, I'll also read it out. Oh, here we go. It is becoming quite comprehensible and easy to understand now. If you insult women, you are a misogynist. If you insult black people, you are a racist. If you insult Jews, you are anti-Semitic. But here is the deal. If you insult Islam, you are practicing freedom of speech. So that was quite a recent quote from Gulf News. Can I get reactions to that very prolific quotation from anyone?
Maybe if I can, just to say that on the answer to how I see intolerance in my private life or my social life,
yeah, sure.
I think I'm a lot confronted working internationally and globally with my own intolerance. And I do understand the quote in the sense of how there is a sort of ruling perspective that it's just a stupid anecdote, but today I was talking with somebody from the Philippines and she organized a symposium and she said, we announce the times in PST time, which is the abbreviation for Philippines time. But of course, everybody thought it was Pacific Standard Time. And just to say like how we perceive the world from a sort of, if we talk about decolonization, taking things for granted that our part of the world is ruling these kind of systems. And this is always about what you take for granted or what you've been raised with. So there is a huge effort, I think, to be done on the level of breaking down our own prejudices, which are often hidden. While we think that we're very open-minded, but we do have these kind of privileges that we are often not aware of. And that's something I encounter a lot in the dialogues that we have, that people say like, yeah, but you, as seeing them as not being part of that kind of a world, because the circumstances are so different and they don't feel like they are being understood within the context they have their daily life in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, John, you want to make a comment there also?
Well, I think the quote is apt in general. I mean, by which I mean that I think it's often the case that is true. That expressing, intolerance of Muslims and sometimes all kinds of hostile ideas about what Islam is like is something that has a place in the mainstream now. So I think it's generally true. I'm gonna kind of duck the question of whether it's specifically true about what Macron said, because to be honest, I didn't pay enough attention to what Macron said and the context of what he said and what people made of what he said and so on. But I think it's generally true that it's okay. Yeah, it's okay to be Islamophobic. You know, it's okay to say that Islam. I don't know. But yeah. So I think it's a fair point in lots of ways.
We've made Muslims the scapegoat, haven't we, for many problems? And someone said, I can't remember who said it. We've made them the other, that everybody agrees it's okay to criticize, and it's not okay.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a Jew, and Jews have lots of experience of being at the sharp end of that, of course. It seems to me, but then, you know, in the context of the work we do around immigration in the UK at Music in Detention, you know, you get a sense really that there's a sort of rolling program of scapegoat of the month, you know. We have the rhetoric around, you know, 10 years ago or whatever, I don't know where the hell it was. Yeah, 10 years ago it was bogus asylum seekers. That was the phrase, you know. And then we've had, you know, like a series of kind of moral panics about othered groups, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Hannes, would you like to comment on this quote as well, briefly, or?
I wish I don't, but I you know, I thought when he said it, it was very insensitive. But it's a little bit like that. You remember that wonderful HSBC adverts in the airports, where the same word and the same things mean different in different cultures. And these are also the expression of, you know, you experience Islam differently in France. But I also, you know, I look at myself and how, you know, coming out of a Christian culture, I am a renegade priest who got kicked out of church, and you know, I have similar kind of bizarre backgrounds that Peter had, and it's always a shame for me growing up in Africa how our forefathers and colonial powers have ruined Africa. And then at the same time, we stand have the audacity to stand on that we are the honorable people standing on rights. And I think, you know, our values should be embraced with humility and kindness and love and compassion, and not with self-righteousness. And I feel if these you know, and I find myself looking at American Christian right-wing evangelicals under Trump making the same kind of self-righteous comments, and I constantly find myself terribly humiliated in my own eyes of just thinking, how dare you do that when you are fairly critical of others doing the same. And I guess this is really the issue of getting to the heart of tolerance, of how do we transform these frames in our own mind and our own prejudices, and that's where we start with towards our enemy. You know, I mean, I in the peace processes that I work in, it's always for me the transformation of people that are enemies. How do they transform into partners in peace? And in the European context or American context or in South African context, is it how do we cross these boundaries of our differences, where despite what we think of the others, that we change the way we look, but to start with ourselves, you know, and not finding constantly a higher ground that we can stand on to judge others. And I think that's for me, I think the sense of constant disciplined humility, and that the fact that these are our values doesn't give us the right to start judging. And that's the last thing we should do in becoming the judges of others because we embrace certain values. I think that should make us rather humble and even more committed to kindness and openness. Anyway,
that's certainly echoing Inga's thoughts of recognizing your own intolerances. That's reaffirming.
If I could add something, I think there are kind of two levels in a way to the work that needs to be done. There's the political layer, the political sphere, and the human sphere. And what to illustrate this, a colleague of mine was present at a city centre demonstration by the English Defence League a few years ago, at this time of year, around November Remembrance. And there was the English Defence League, who were Islamophobic, and there was a counter demonstration, both in the same city centre, and the police, of course, were keeping the two demonstrations apart. And the result of that was that the English Defence League were unable to get to the cenotaph in the city centre, and my colleague told me about seeing a man who was beside himself with upset and frustration that he couldn't get to the cenotaph and pay respects, and felt that he'd been prevented, by hostile forces from doing so. And the discussion we then had was, how does one respond to that? And the only answer that we were able to come up with, and I haven't found still haven't found an alternative, really, I think, is that in the political sphere, platforms have to be proposed and opposed. And if something is being proposed that is hateful, it must be opposed. But at the human level, we can show compassion to someone like that individual, and engage with why they feel the way they do, and how they see the world, and what makes them, what's driving it. And I think that art can do that human level stuff so well. But something we're working on a lot at MID at the moment is to try and do better the job of getting that material, getting the creative results and the stories and so on back into that bigger sphere, that political sphere.
Right.
Because otherwise it can have a powerful impact on those individuals, but that's where it ends.
Yeah.
So we have to cross between the two. We can act differently in those two layers, but we have to also do something to move material from the human sphere to the political sphere.
That's a great point. And we have some guidance from the UN here on observances on Tolerance Day. So we can think about law, that governments should be responsible for enforcing human rights and punishing hate crimes in this. Education, extremely important. We touched on that. Access to information to everyone. So there's freedom of expression, there's press pluralism, individual awareness. So people are taking this personally, and then local solutions. So we look at individual communities and not just a whole economy or a whole country. I think it's worth, in the closing minutes of our panel discussion, thinking about the arts and what art can do, or what is art's role globally in counteracting intolerance. So whoever wants to go first, these would kind of be our closing comments about art's role on International Day for Tolerance. So we should make this count. Who would like to make some closing remarks? And everyone will get a chance, obviously. Who would like to kick us off? Maybe Inga, from your festival standpoint?
Yeah, I think humility would be a good starting point, as Hannes said, and to refer to John, like what he said in the earlier panel, actually, that festivals can create, or art can create these safe spaces where we can have opposing views or differ in opinion. I think one of the things that experts agree on these days is that the challenges that we face today in our world are not to be solved by one country nor by one sector or one expertise. So I think there is a strong need for international cooperation and cross-sectoral cooperation, as you said, John, to feed back the knowledge that we gather into policy debates, but also to other levels of expertise, philanthropy, foundations, these kind of things. And I think festivals in general can be great spaces to lead by example, to give, to not go by the norm, to give different possibilities, or to reimagine how we would like the world to look like and how we would like to live in it together.
And the great thing about that too is you create that environment in an event, an online event or physical event, but then people leave there and go to wherever they came from and influence more people, don't they? And say, this amazing, enlightening experience with, you know, this is how we can look at things differently, whether they are so overt about it or just change their behavior that infects other people around them. I think that's great. Okay, Hannes, can we ask for your comments, please? So how art is counteracting global intolerance?
Yeah, I think, you know, you see so much resistance art during oppression. And I saw recently, I couldn't find the picture while I was driving to this other city, but there's a wonderful drawing of one of the kids in a Syrian refugee camp of hot air balloons. And it was really fascinating to me, the children's drawings of balloons and stars. And when we asked him, is it, they wanted to see the world from up high. They wanted to get out of where they were, and they were drawing this incredible environment around them. And when I asked the young girl about the stars, she said, "In my village, the stars were so big, and here the stars are so small." You know, and it's the air pollution, the light pollution of a city, where the stars are very small within the village, so you can see them much more clearer. And I guess that was for me such a symbol of what art and some of the artists that I grew up in South Africa, the poets and wall artists and the theater of just, those were the visions that strengthened you. Those were the visions that were your oxygen at a time of absolute despair. And I think that's what, you know, we must keep alive. And you see that in every uprising and in every oppressed situation where the artists join, you just feel the spirit lift, you know, and people breathe for a moment. And I think that's such an important thing, because during oppression and wars, people suppress the art because they don't want the people to, they want to control the people. And where art gives spaces for people to be free and breathe again. And I think that's such a important role art play in these spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Okay, John, do you have anything more to add?
Yeah. Well, building really on that point about art as a form of, you know, resistance and sustenance, I think there's a danger when we talk about listening to the other side, you know, and understanding the other side, which I passionately believe we need to do. But the danger in it, seems to me, is the illusion of a level playing field. There is, at the human level, everyone has their view and their beliefs and where they've come from and so on. But at a societal level, there is structural violence and structural inequality. And one of the things that the arts can do is to help people who are little heard or silenced to make their voices heard.
I think that's a great closing statement. So with that, I thank our guests, Hannes, Inge and John. and everyone on the Art27 team today for putting this live stream together. You can find us on art27.art, and you can find us on the Facebook page of Musicians Without Borders, where you'll find this live stream. Thanks again for joining in and your great contributions today. You've been fantastic guests, and I hope our paths will cross again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.